Sometimes I think I have too much of a fondness for obscure titles, which I should apologize for, but I won't, because I enjoy obscure titles, I guess. Hey, Requiem, it's good to see you. Honestly, it's good to see anybody who happens to be here. I know that we tend to have people kind of filter in over the first few minutes at any rate, so it's the time to vamp. It's Thursday, which means that tomorrow is Friday. Kung Fu Fenris hits the year mark. That is a thing. I believe Kung Fu Fenris, that might make you among the first to show off a 1-year subscription here. Hey, Battaloos. It's good to see you too. Honestly, this topic is kind of interesting. Last week, we went over problematic PC tropes. So the kind of PC characters that would come into a game that I can instantly tell that without a delicate hand can end up being a problem. That Zeroth is Zeroth, yeah, and not some obscure character name. Yeah, that is actually how you write Zeroth. OTH would also work as well. I had to look it up because the ordinals for Zero are not necessarily well known, but that's what it is. The key that I'm looking for here, though, when I was looking at character archetypes, and then it was brought up by a comment on YouTube. Let's actually bring it up here because I think that it makes for quite an interesting thing. So Dave Laurie commented, "This was a fabulous episode, something I've made note of and have shared with my group. What are about doing the opposite, tropes that are a joy to play with?" And I was looking into that. I was thought, okay, well, let's see what we can find out. Let's see what we can do about talking about positive character tropes. And I realized that that's kind of a difficult topic to cover. And part of the reason why it's a difficult topic to cover is because there are so many different tropes that can work, and a lot of tropes kind of fall into they fall into, sure, this would be great as long as somebody is doing it right. And so I realized that what I was really looking for, and what I kind of morphed the topic into, so Dave, I apologize if I'm not getting exactly what you're looking for, but this is going to cover it somewhat, are what do I want to hear from a player when they show up at session 0? Maybe it's a player I've played with before. Maybe it's a player that I've never played with and that this is kind of my first time meeting them. But I've run a lot of session 0s in a lot of different kind of ways. Sometimes I meet somebody and I know instantly that this is somebody who I'm going to enjoy gaming with. And so that's why we're here today. We're going to look into just what we might be able to see in terms of this. Hey, Gilligood. Yeah, it's good to be here at the Almost Weekend as well. And we're going to take this in terms of quotes. So if you have a suggestion of something that you want to put in, by all means, throw it in chat. We're going to take a look at all these topics. We're going to discuss them. I definitely want to hear your opinions on them, your impressions as well. We're not speedrunning today. Speedrunning is going to happen another time when we actually have a defined list. But today, we're going to look at specifically the things that I hear from players that make me feel good when they come into a session 0. So if you are planning on joining a new campaign, maybe you want to keep these in mind. Of course, not all of these are going to be able to be said. Some of them kind of are mutually exclusive even. But there is going to be a nice kind of wide range of things that I think are important going into a session 0 that'll really help you not only get along well with your storyteller, but also get along well with your fellow players. So let's start with the first one. And we'll call it up right here. I know what I want to play. I'm not going to hate you if you don't know, but I definitely am going to like you if you come in and you have a clear, defined idea of what you are interested in playing. That doesn't mean you have to have the entire character ready. It means that you know what is exciting about the game for you, what would excite you in terms of your character, what would excite you in terms of feed or mood or plot, what would excite you in terms of system or settings. If you come to me and you have a clear, defined idea about any of these things, it helps me because then I can help you realize that want. If you come in and I say, so what do you want to play? And your answer is, I don't know. I guess just... At that point, I'm not sure that you're actually all that invested in the game. I'm not sure that you're even eager to play. It's totally fine if the answer is, I'm not sure, but there's got to be something for me to latch on. I feel like playing a character who... I've been playing a lot of healers. I'd like to play somebody who does damage this time around. That's a want. I really want to play something that can highlight more role-playing these days. I mean, like, combat is fine. I don't mind doing combat, but I really want to be somebody who's good at the talking aspect. Great. I really want to play somebody from the North. The North interests me. I love the setting behind it. There's a bunch of themes that really speak to me about that. Fantastic. All of these things really help when it comes to showing up and asking me, what are we going to do for game? Because if I know what you want, and if I don't have to guess, then I can actually give you the game that you deserve, the game that you want to have. Requiem says, in the same vein, I also like to hear, I have some ideas, but I want to see what everyone else has in mind before I decide. So that actually gets me onto this, because I think that this is an excellent thing to say, but it does come with a caveat. I'm ready to fit in with the rest of the group. What are they playing? So there are a bunch of people, myself included, that care a little less about playing something specific and care more about fleshing out the group, about filling holes that are left open, about doing something that other people are not. Sometimes it's about being special, about being like, I want to be the person who gets the spotlight when this thing occurs. And sometimes it's tactical. I realize that our group doesn't have a tank and I think we should have a tank. All of these things are really appreciated because it essentially shows that you care not just about your own play, but about everyone else's. Where this can get difficult, and where I throw a little bit of a caveat in, is if somebody comes in and says, well, I don't know what I want to do. What does everybody else want to do? I'll just do what they're not. That still means that I don't know what you want. And if I feel like all you're going to do is fill in the hole that's left open, then this could be one of three things. Either genuinely you're happy to play anything, which is great, but this is the most rare. It could mean I absolutely don't want to be tactically disadvantaged, but I'm also not willing to speak up about my own preferences, so I might end up with something that I don't like, which is bad, or I don't care enough about this game to make any decisions. I'll just go with what everybody else wants. The latter two of those don't feel good. They really don't feel good for the storyteller, and the other players may catch on as well. I know that it is sometimes when you're showing up to a game, you don't need to get that invested. A one shot, I'll play whatever. Doesn't matter. It's a one shot. If I don't like it in 2 or 3 hours, it's going to be done anyway, and I don't have to worry about it. But if I have a situation where somebody comes in and they we're getting prepared for a multi-session campaign, and they're just like, oh, what is everybody else doing? Because I don't really want to, I don't want to step on any toes. Well, I'm glad that you're considerate of your fellow players, but you also can run into that situation similar to if I ask, hey, so we're going now to eat. What restaurant would you like to go to? And you're like, I don't know. Well, I think that there's a tendency, and I'm guilty of this. I'm extremely guilty of this. There's a tendency to say, oh, well, I don't mind. What would you like? Because we're trying to be polite. We're trying to give somebody else the chance to make the choice. But in reality, what often you're doing is you're passing the burden of choice to somebody else, and then you reserve the right for yourself to absolve yourself of responsibility if it doesn't work out, or to complain if it isn't exactly to your liking, but saying that it's fine, you'll go along with it because you want to do it for the good of the group. It is much the same with role-playing. Avoid the urge to say, I don't mind, when the answer is actually, I don't care, or when the answer is, I do mind, but I want to be polite. A session 0 isn't necessarily the place to be overly polite. It's actually the time for you to make sure that you state your needs and your wants. And that's difficult for a lot of people, myself included, to do. It's difficult to be so open as to what you would prefer, especially if you suspect that someone else may not agree with what you have asked. I've heard this being described as very Canadian. I actually think that this is more worldwide. Everybody, to a certain degree, can fall one way or the other on this. And I think it's relatively common for somebody to think being polite is the best option when it isn't always. And just so that you know, because Requiem here is saying, this is why I premise it with, I have some ideas. It applies to me that they put some thought into it and they have some character ideas in mind. It means a bit more than, I don't know, what is everyone else playing? Absolutely. And I'm not saying you were wrong. I'm saying that this is the part that I really have to pay attention to myself, because I know it's where I can be weak. I know that it is tempting for me to show up and say, yeah, I'll do whatever. It's especially difficult because I'm commonly the storyteller when it comes to gaming groups. And so when I get the chance to be a player, I sometimes worry that I might step forward and be like, well, I'd like to do this. And everyone will immediately go like, oh, okay, well, let's just give it to him. That's fine because he never gets to play. Let's give him the option. And I'm like, oh, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to make people feel like they have to go along with what I say just because. It's fine. I can state a preference. I can say I'd like to play this class, and then everyone else can just deal with it. Because if somebody else really wanted to play that class too, then there are ways to handle it. Because the next thing that I really like to see when it comes to somebody showing up, which kind of ties into this, is, and we may see this more than once, I have a backup plan. The reason why this is important is because sometimes this goes along with this, and this is actually, believe it or not, something that I really like to see, which is I would like an exception to the rules, but I have a backup plan if that's not cool. In general, I really like people who have backup plans because you can't always get everything that you want. Maybe it's because you've made a mistake about how the system works, or maybe it's because you've come up with a concept that is incompatible with the game that everyone else wants to play. Maybe it's a little too close to what somebody else has decided for their character and they came up with it first. Or maybe while you're playing, while you're figuring everything out in the session 0, you realize that your character concept's not going to work quite the way that you wanted to. I'm not saying that you have to show up with 4 ideas and 4 completed character sheets when you arrive at a session 0. But I do like that sometimes somebody can say, well, I'm interested in this, and if I'm not playing that, then maybe this would be fun as well. Requiem. Yes. It is true that you can't always get what you want. And if you have a backup plan, then that means that you've also done some thinking about more than one thing. It means you haven't put all your eggs in one basket, because it is sometimes disheartening for somebody to come in, say, I really want to do this, and then have their hopes crushed because that doesn't work out and they have nothing. And they tied all of their hopes and dreams on this one concept, which no longer can work. At the same time, I do like it when somebody challenges an exception, challenges a rule, or challenges a restriction that I've placed. And the reason why I like it is because since I stated the restriction, or since it's in the rulebook already, I still feel secure in saying no. But if somebody has asked for an exception, then sometimes they have a really good reason for it, a reason that I'd love to consider. Because I do want to give players what they want. An example of this is when I ran full party, Jess specifically asked if characters could take craft as a heavy investment in their character. And I had specifically said that I would prefer no craft-focused characters because the rules for crafting in Exalted 3rd Edition are not elegant, and they can be difficult for a stream. However, Jess was pretty focused on this. So what we ended up discussing amongst ourselves, what we decided were a different set of rules that we could use to try to make up for the fact that I wasn't going to fully adopt the craft system for Exalted 3rd. And they ended up being very happy with the game as it ran for that character. It's true that we never really got around to doing a whole lot of crafting in the game, but the point was they made their hopes known. And that was what was important for me, because I was willing to make changes based on that. I did rule of cool it. I did. But rule of cooling is easy, right? Just do what's cool and make it a rule. So if you run up against a restriction, I'd rather you tell me that you would rather break the restriction or the rule than to say, oh, well, I really wanted to do that, but I can't, so I won't even try. Try. Just be accepting if I then later on say that I can't make that happen for you. Because that's where I run into an issue. If somebody wants to break a rule or bend a restriction, and then when I say I really don't think I can accommodate that they get pouty. All right. While we're discussing about what people do or do not want to play, an example of something that I like to hear is I know how to ask for help when I don't know what I want to play. This is especially common among new players, but it's also, you'll find, common among people for whom a setting or a system is new, that they'll come in and they just don't know. They're not sure what they want to play, but they do have the ability to talk with other people to try and figure it out. If you come in and you say, I don't know what I want to play, but then you're shutting down suggestion after suggestion after suggestion, or you're just sitting there letting suggestions wash over you instead of working together to find a character, that's going to be difficult for me to help. But if you are ready to ask for help, if you know that you're going to need the help and you come with that mindset, we can work with that. We can absolutely get something ready, and we can make sure that it will be fun for you when you join the game and have the chance to try something that you haven't before. But you actually have to ask for that help. And if you're ready to do that, then I will help you 100%. I, in fact, really enjoy helping somebody who is struggling, because that means that not only can I help them get past that struggle point to the point where they're going to start enjoying themselves, but they can also at that point come forward and say to me what they would like, and I can help them get a better understanding of the setting and the system while they're making that character than they would have if I was just throwing stuff at them. People tend to become more invested in a game when they themselves are making the effort to step forward. If they're being passive and just accepting what people are giving them, or if they're being the bare minimum of interactive and saying yes or no, that's more difficult, and it's hard to help at that point. Requiem says, one new player to Exalted asked, said they didn't know what they wanted to play and asked, hey, what niche do we need? I'm willing to give it a go. Absolutely. But if somebody is brand new to Exalted or brand new to a system, I tend to not want to let them automatically just accept what's needed. And part of the reason for this is stereotyping. So this absolutely can work, especially if a player is experienced at role-playing. And it also can work if that niche that needs to be filled is something that they happen to really enjoy. But I've also seen this, and it is... I've also seen this in an unfortunate reality, is when somebody who's new to role-playing, usually trying it out for the first time because of a relationship, whether it's a relationship that already exists or a relationship that they hope to exist. But they join the game because they want to share this experience with somebody who they are interested in. And then they get shunted into the role that nobody wants to play. And when that happens, it can feel, even if you don't necessarily put it that way, if the rest of the group is like, whoa, thank goodness we found a healer, for instance, Battlelou's mentioning healer girlfriend. Oh, thank goodness we found a healer. Then it can kind of come across as none of us wanted to do this. Therefore, it's boring. Therefore, you get to do the boring one. You get to have the boring job. And for somebody who's new, that can be kind of frustrating. It can feel pretty weak. Just like if you were playing a class-based shooter, or and somebody said, we need a tank, you have to play a tank, but you don't have a lot of experience playing tanks. You don't have a lot of experience playing anything. So to then feel like you're the linchpin of the group, because if you don't play what everyone else wants you to play, you will fail them, can put a lot of pressure on a new player. So niches are really important. Oh, Luke, hey, it's glad to see you. Yeah, I guess Twitch glitched out for you there. So just be careful about niches. Totally worth it if somebody isn't new to role playing and kind of knows the basics of behind it, or if they know the basics of the system or the setting. But try to avoid just dumping somebody into the niche. They may not want that niche, but then they feel pressured to take it. And feeling pressured is never a way to start a game. That doesn't feel good. MMOs can be like that. Absolutely. Requiem. Being shoehorned into certain roles that you don't want to play because we need it, you need to do it, is essentially saying, I don't want to do it, so you have to do it. Now, if you were in a group and everybody in the group sort of says, okay, well, we all know that we need an X, and we know that this person likes playing X's and nobody else does. Hey, person, do you mind playing X? That can absolutely work out. Zeroth is the ordinal number for 0. So it is, instead of a first impression, it's the 0th impression. It's the impression that happens at session 0. It's me trying to be clever and failing at it, Luke. Don't worry. This is something that I'm definitely not saying refuse to give the niche to somebody new, or refuse to give the niche to somebody who says, I don't mind, just give me whatever. I am saying that it is something you have to pay attention to and keep in mind, because one of the things that I also have noticed is if you relegate somebody to a niche role, say healer, and remember that a healer is kind of doing the opposite of what everyone else is doing at the table, it means that the next time they still have no experience on how to play most of the game, because they focus on one very tiny niche aspect, healing. Now, some people really enjoy healing. It's the typical example. I really like in the most recent D&D campaign that I've played in, I played a life cleric, which is essentially a heal bot. I did not do much damage at all. I was keeping people on their feet. But that's what I wanted to play at the time, and that's cool. But I definitely, if that was my only experience with D&D, and then the next time around someone asked, what do you want to play? I might not know how to deal damage. I might not know the tactics about that sort of thing, because I'm used to doing the opposite. So, Zeroth. Yeah, no, that'd be a good character name. I'd absolutely see that. People can be new. It's true. But whether you're new or not, I'm always going to be happy if somebody says, I've done my research on the setting. I never require my players to memorize the setting of a game. It's kind of useless, first of all. Also, most settings that I play in are so vast that they would be really difficult for somebody to get a full appreciation and understanding of before they ever started playing. This is especially true of games in the Storyteller system, either World of Darkness or Exalted. And I don't want people to feel like they have to do 100 hours of homework just to step up to the table. But I do like it if somebody has had the chance to sort of go through a synopsis and then said, okay, well, here's the parts of the setting that I'm interested in, and here's how I want to tie them into my character. Because that doesn't take a ton of time to do. But it does mean that you've invested a little bit of time, and now I can trust that you're making a more informed decision about the kind of player that you want to be and the kind of character you want to play. Whether in Exalted it means I know what part of creation I want to be from, whether in Vampire it's I know the difference between the 13 clans and I think I want to play this one. Both of those things are very useful for me to know, and then being able to help you come to the decision of how to finish your character and how you'll fit in with the rest of the group. It's not... But I urge you, if you are looking at this and thinking, oh, I got to make sure that I know the setting before I show up. I'm fine if you show up to a game and you aren't that familiar. But I do care that you made an effort, and it does show. It does make a big difference if you've made that effort. Requiem seems to back me up on this. I am absolutely delighted if a player did enough research to have the bare bone basics of the setting. Don't need to know everything, but having a basic understanding helps me way more than they realize. Even such things as making sure that people have a common language when you start playing means that you can get invested in the world faster, as opposed to having to explain everything as it comes along. So, again, definitely not a requirement. Absolutely not. But I still like to see it. It is I will tell you something that I absolutely don't like to see, which is that if I've asked you to read something and you show up and you did not read it, despite having plenty of time to do so, I'm immediately worried because it shows that there's a lack of commitment. I don't often require reading, and when I do, I make sure that I keep it short. But if you can't even be asked to read like 2 or 3 pages worth of text before arriving, then I'm going to be worried, because now I'm like, this was something that I wanted everyone to have in their heads. Even if you don't understand it, I'm fine with that. I'm fine if you read something and you don't get it. But if you don't even try, I'm not worried. I'm a little worried that you're not going to try for any of it. And that's not fair. Not to yourself, not to the players around you, and certainly not to your storyteller either. Kung Fu Fenris mentions, one of my GMs are absolutely terrified of the opposite, too much of me reading the setting. This is also true. If I feel like you've come in and you have spent 300 hours memorizing the setting, then that can also be a danger. First off, because that puts a lot of pressure on me. You've invested so many hours already into the game, and that means that if the game doesn't continue, then there may be a point where you say, but now I wasted all my time or all of my money getting all of these materials and learning to understand them. This happened to me recently. When I tried to run Genesis, it didn't work out. It didn't work out for a whole bunch of different reasons. Multiple reasons, but I felt badly because I had asked people to pick up a new setting. People went out and bought books. They bought the dice, the special dice for Genesis that aren't compatible with another game. And the game fell apart. And I felt badly because I did ask people to make an investment, and they did make that investment in money and time. And then it didn't work. I may be taking too much of the blame, or more of the blame than is my fair share on that one, but it does make me nervous then if somebody comes in and says, hey, so now I know everything there is to know about Pathfinder. Let's go. And I'm like, Pathfinder's huge. Oof. Now, if you came across that knowledge before you showed up to the table, fine. If you came up with that knowledge because you just really enjoyed reading it and you couldn't put it down, that's also fine. But if you also come in and you start quoting extremely obscure facts at me, that's going to perhaps alienate the other players at the table, or even myself if I'm not familiar. And what's even worse, and absolutely not saying this is what happens to you, Kung Fu Fenris, is if you start checking me for the knowledge that you've picked up. If you start making references to obscure things and seeing if I'll catch on. Hey, Real Brick Wall. It's good to see you. Mod Real Brick Wall returning from a mysterious disappearance. Very glad that you're here. Very happy to see you. 'Cause yeah, I definitely get offended if somebody comes to me and then starts sort of testing my knowledge to see whether I truly know. This has happened with Exalted. It has happened because I run Exalted online, to the point where even though I specifically said at the beginning of Exalt Witch Nexus, I said, I am only drawing from official sources for canon material. Everything else is mine and how I choose to do it. And I said that at the outset because I wanted my players to feel like they didn't have to go back and start reading second and first edition books. I based a lot of it on the canon, but I decided to make some changes here and there because of what I thought the game would want and need. And yet I had some people say, well, this isn't exactly how I play Exalted, so clearly this person doesn't know what they're talking about. I read a few of those comments. And while I totally am like, if you need everything to be rules as written or setting as written, I'm not the guy for you. Don't watch my games. At the same time, it somehow being a criticism of my abilities as a storyteller didn't make sense to me. Gatekeeping me or checking me is not the way. So be careful if you just read all of the materials. So it happens. Yeah, setting is written. What a concept. Requiem says, I have the problem where I know too much about Exalted, where I have to ask the storyteller sometimes, hey, mind if I roll this to see if I know it? Yeah, but that I think is fair even for people who don't necessarily know. If you don't have any dots in occult, why would you know about something? If you don't have any dots in lore, maybe that would be beyond your understanding. So that sort of is like common to all games, though. It's amazing how many people use intelligence as a dump stat and then sit there for 30 minutes and try to reason their way out of an encounter when their character wouldn't be able to. I'm not saying that's necessarily bad play, but I am saying that it impresses me sometimes when characters actually don't meta, because it's way too common and way too tempting to do so. Gilad mentions, I had a similar scenario a while back in Exalted 2. I want to see how much does my character know about this, but Gilad knows a lot, so you don't actually have to say anything. Yep. And I also think that that's fair. If everybody at the table is familiar with something, and you can say, do I know about this? We don't have to go over the next hour explaining it. We just get a better understanding of what's going on, and I think that's super fair. I think that works out well. All right. So we've talked about having your research done on the setting. This one is going to leave some people behind, but it shouldn't surprise any of my regular viewers. I've created a backstory, but don't worry. It's just one paragraph and I've added a few bullet points at the end. I like seeing somebody who comes in with an idea for a backstory. It means that you've done some thinking, and it means that you've started to get invested in the game already. I definitely hate it if you've written a backstory that's going to take me longer than 5 minutes to read. If it's short, that means that I get to help create the backstory with you. And that can help because it's my job to tie you into the setting, to tie you into the other players, to tie you into the story that's going to happen. But if you've come in with something that's already too well defined, I don't have any avenue of access there. I can't help you make the decisions that will help tie you in. I don't have any input. Plus, I may not care. A lot of people, myself included, can sometimes write things that they think are fascinating, and to everyone else, it's boring. Boring sucks. And unfortunately, it's all too common because honestly, how many times have you written a backstory and then, rewritten it, did a second draft, then a third draft, and then run it through a workshop to see whether it's actually that interesting, and then you write what you think is interesting and you come in with it. I can handle that if it's 300 words, but if it's 3,000 words, then I'm going to be a lot less interested to slog my way through it. Plus, at that point, I kind of feel like you've already played your character. Your character's story is so complete already. What is going to be interesting about adding to it? Yeah, exactly. People don't do drafts. So for me, and I know that this isn't for everybody, but for me, I want you to show up with a backstory which is a lot less loosely defined, or a lot more loosely defined. And I don't want it to be long. It also really helps, by the way, if it's formatted correctly. If you're going to write it down, do your best to write it down in a legible fashion, like actually write full sentences. Use paragraphs. Use carriage returns and line breaks. I say this, and it doesn't always hit, but I have received character backstories for a one-shot LARP that are 2 pages of text, no page breaks, and no real punctuation that fill the entire page. 2 pages of that. It was horrendous to read because not only was it too long, but it also was very difficult to read through anyway. So, LARP backstories. Oh, yeah. And if you have bullet points are great too. I don't need it to be a glorious piece of writing. I need it so that we can start getting together to work on a great story. You come in and say, I want to be this. I want to have this happen to me. This is a mystery in my life. If you have hooks that you're interested in, great. If you come to me and you say, here's an idea for a few things that could potentially be in my character's backstory, but I don't need these to be a thing, but it's there if you want it, I'm a happy guy. Because I always want to potentially reach out and be like, oh yeah, that would be cool. That'd be an interesting thing to see. And if you've left me the hook open, then I can do something with it that will not only help me, but it might also shock and surprise you. And sometimes that's exactly what you're going for. Instead of just saying, yep, I'm bringing up this thing that's in your backstory that you've already defined and that I don't really have much to do with, but I guess it's there, doesn't help as much. And Requiem says, I try to keep my backstory short and fairly simple for the storyteller. After that, I enjoy writing little short stories within the backstory. Helps me better define my character's personality, but those are for me. Storyteller can read it if they want. Yep. And this is aside from a session 0 thing, but if you choose to write fiction based on the game, that's great. But you should not expect people to have to read it. And I follow this too. I've written bonus material for several of the games that I've run here on this channel and on my previous channel with the same group. And people can really enjoy reading those backstories, but some people are not interested. They came to game. They didn't come to read. And believe it or not, the two are very different experiences. So if you are going to write something, please don't write it with the expectation that everyone else should have to read it. They don't. Nor do they have to like it, even if they do choose to read it. But if it's there and it's interesting, then I'll definitely want to have a look. Most of the time when I see players write little short stories of their own volition, I love reading them because it gives me more insight into their character. When you force somebody to write, though, like blue booking, well, that's when I check out. That's what I hate. But that's me. And that isn't necessarily everybody. Here's something in terms of backstories that I want to see more often when somebody comes in on a session 0. My character is people they care about, and they care about them. So actually, let's try that again, shall we? Let's put that up so that it makes sense. My characters, people they care about, and people care about them. This is one of the tropes that I decided to add on because all too often I get somebody who has no attachments. I have no family. I have no friends. I show up. I am alone. The world is a cold, dark place, and I am fighting against it. Well, you've just given me a character who doesn't have a lot to lose. And if you don't have a lot to lose, then drama is hard to establish because there are no stakes. And if the stakes are just your life, well, that doesn't give me a whole lot to play with either. Because I don't necessarily want to kill you. And even if I do end up saying that we're going to play dice as rolled, then if you die, you die. The story doesn't have a lot of dimension at that point. I really like it when somebody comes in and they say, yeah, I have a family and I love them and I care about them, but I had to leave them behind, because it means that their family is an ever-present force in their life. It also makes them more relatable, because most people who I've played with have had at least one family member who they get along with quite well and that they really enjoy and care about, and who is still alive. So this is something that I like to see, because it also shows that they are open to the idea of forging relationships as opposed to attempting the loner, edgy, angsty style. And loner, edgy, angsty doesn't always work out. The vast majority of character stories that I've had where somebody comes in and they don't have a family, they work out. But it takes extra effort, and it doesn't necessarily work out as well as if they had somebody who they cared about in the meantime. We don't necessarily ever have to see them either. Maybe you do have a family, but they just don't play that much of a role in your life. And that's okay too. There's plenty of people who grow up, leave the nest, and that's it. But it's when somebody says, oh, there's nobody who I care about, nobody who's left because insert disaster here. Well, that's also a problem, because maybe I don't want to tell a disaster story, but you're kind of forcing me to because you've already experienced one. So I definitely like seeing that. This one should be pretty common these days if you're a regular viewer here. I have input on what safety tools we can use. If you're actively engaged in making sure that the game is safe, I'm definitely going to want to keep you around more than if you come in and say safety tools, I guess, or safety tools, that sounds lame. And there are a lot of people who think that safety tools are lame. They believe that safety tools are there to restrict them as opposed to liberate them. But this is the same sort of feeling of, it's the game's not as exciting if we don't have a safety net. Or the games or stunts are more exciting when they're done by the actors themselves, with no stunt coordinator and no safety involved, because I want there to be real risk. No, you don't. You think you do, but you don't. The best stunts, the one that you've seen, have been very carefully planned. They've been very carefully planned. Everybody executes them as safely as possible. And that's how you make sure that you get good stunts, because people don't have to worry for their lives. They can worry about the performance. Same with safety tools. So Biff the Boss points out, which is also true, having prior relationships can also offer interesting connections to other PCs. Absolutely. That's completely correct. So yeah, this is a minor point, and it's a topic that we harp on a lot over here at RPG Clinic. But yes, if you have safety tools, then I am happy. This is one that can be adjusted depending on your current situation, but this is, I've put this one because it sounds the most negative, but it in fact is the most positive. I didn't invite anyone else to the game. If I didn't ask you to find other players, I don't want them. If I didn't ask for an audience, I might not want that either. And I know that sounds strange for somebody who streams role-playing games. I basically have always asked for an audience if I'm streaming, because otherwise I wouldn't stream the game at all. But it sucks. It really sucks if I'm sitting down to get started with a game and somebody shows up and says, "Can I play?" I might not have room for you, but you're already here. And now I'm the bad guy because I have to tell you no. Or, "Can I just watch?" Even if I'm okay with it, everybody else has to be okay with it. And you try asking everybody at a table if you can stay. Is that person really going to look you in the eye and say, "No, you have to go"? So you're kind of forcing everybody to be there, and not everybody wants to play for an audience. Not everybody is comfortable, because communal storytelling can be quite a vulnerable act, and they don't necessarily want other people participating in that with you. So in this case, I don't want anybody bringing somebody unannounced, whether it's to play or whether it's to watch. If I don't expect them, they shouldn't be there. Because then either I have to force my way around some things or not. If you must bring somebody, if you're like, "I really want somebody to play with us," or somebody has asked if they could join the next game, talk to me privately first. And I can make the call without having the pressure of, "You're already here, so you might as well stay." Now, for some games, this doesn't apply. For large-scale LARPs, generally, more people, more better, right? As long as they follow the rules and there's room for them and all of that, then it's great. When I was running smaller scale live action games with 20 to 30 people, if somebody else came in that day, normally that was fine. That was absolutely fine. Sometimes it was a little frustrating because I'm like, well, if they want to play, but they know nothing about the game, and I have to run a LARP for 30 people now, I might not have time to sit down and like give them the whole spiel and get them up and started with a character. So generally, if somebody did that, I said, "Okay, you know what? Here's the thing. If you haven't read the book or anything, here's a very basic concept. Run with this for today, and we'll help make you a character next week." Because also sometimes it was enough to sort of have them run through one session. And they were like, "This is weird. I don't ever want to come back, and then I don't have to waste my time." But yeah, let's see what other people are saying about these. Requiem says, "I have a friend that is interested in playing the game. Would you be all right with one more? Would that be an okay question if the player accepts it? Should you say no?" If they're not there, if you're asking me before session 0, it is always okay to ask me, because then I can say no. If Kate came to me before the start of Exaltwitch Academy and said, "Can we add a 4th player?" That's a bit easier for me to start considering, can we add a 4th player? Do I want to add a 4th player? What are the logistics to adding a 4th player? And then I could have come up with a more reasoned answer. But if she showed up at session 0 with her friend in tow, well, now it's on me to be like, "You got to go. You can't be here," because I don't want a 4th player. And I'm not going to want to do that because that's rude. It goes right back to the whole, we want to be polite. We don't like being put in the position of being selfish or rude often. And it's especially rude if you're like, "Okay, well, if everybody at the table says it's all right," because now you're putting it to a group decision. And I don't like making groups make decisions as a group for something careful like this, because if the answer is no, it's really hard to give that no. So Kung Fu Fenders actually ran LARPs on a bi-weekly basis. It was every 2 weeks, not every week. I was just doing that for simplicity's sake. But yeah, Real Brick Wall mentions, and I completely agree, people bringing unexpected new guests is a real killer. It absolutely is. Especially if you're a storyteller like I am, who doesn't like to run large groups. 4 is like where my maximum is. I love 3. 4 is all right. 5 is my absolute limit. And at that point, I'm already like, and anything higher than 5. And I've realized now, I don't want to, unless it's a live action game. Live action games, I can run way more people because then everybody is creating their own fun. But when it's like at a table, more than 5, I stop having fun. So I say no at this point. But if that 6th person shows up and says, hey, can I play? That puts a lot of pressure on me. Oh, it's okay. I'll just play an NPC. But maybe I didn't want someone to play an NPC. Right? And then it spirals into that. So here's one that, seriously, if you bring this to game, if you bring this to session 0, you're gonna create an unnatural desire in me. I've cleared my schedule to make sure that I can commit to game. One of the reasons why RPG Clinic works is that we know that Sunday evenings are for game, and we do not plan for things on Sunday evenings. Occasionally they happen. We understand that real life calls. We understand that sometimes it's a once in a blue moon event that you just got to make. Sometimes it's, there's family pressures or work pressures and all that. All of those are acceptable. That's not a problem. But the problem that we run into is if you don't commit to that time, and if you aren't willing to protect that time, you're going to end up having you're going to end up playing a lot less than you want, and it's going to become frustrating for everyone else. Maybe you're only going to play once a month. Maybe you're only going to play once every 6 months or once a year, but you plan that day and you make sure that you keep that day open. Now, if I said, we'll play Sunday evenings except when somebody's got something going on, well, then someone will always have something going on, because they'll always figure, well, oh, I just wanted to do this one thing. Just this once. We play every week. It's no big deal. But then everybody's got something like that. And then the game just never happens. If somebody comes into game and says, oh, I made sure that I don't work that day. Perfect. Well, then we're in business. Oh, yeah. No, normally I have things on Fridays, but I moved those. So now my Fridays are free. I'm down. So if you can say that you've come in and you said, this is what I've done. I've made sure that I can make game on a regular basis, a basis that we've decided. Fantastic. And that doesn't always work out. It sometimes doesn't work out at all. So then this is the backup that I love to see players say, let me help find a regular time that we can all meet. Don't make your storyteller do all the work. When it comes to logistics, we don't want to do it. We don't. We have enough to worry about. I'll contribute, but it is now a policy of mine that if there's a game that's happening and people want me to run it and I have the time and I'm interested, I absolutely will. But one of my caveats is I'm not the one who figures out when the game is going to happen. And if game has to be rescheduled, I'm not the one who has to make sure that everything is fine. I don't want that responsibility, because for most of my gaming life, that was my responsibility, and it was on top of all the other things that I had to do. I want to make sure that everybody's invested. And if everybody's invested, everyone will try to help and make sure that things will work out. So, come in with an offer to assist. Don't come in and sit there and say, well, when can we meet? And then do that. Or worse, be like, I guess I can, well, right? If you say nothing, horrible. It's only marginally better if you say, well, I'll make a doodle to find out when people can make it to game next. Doodles are awful. Don't fucking use Doodle. Doodle is an online tool where people can say when they are available, and it essentially then shows a breakdown of when everybody is available, and so you can pick the right time. For an occasional thing, this is fine. For something that's supposed to happen on a regular basis, it sucks, because I also don't necessarily want to be like, well, game is going to be on Tuesday this week. Next week it'll be on Wednesday. The next week it'll be on Tuesday again. Next week it'll be on Friday. The next week we're not going to play at all. The following week we'll play on Sunday, but in the morning. And then the next day we're going to, like, it's rough to do that. So doodle for one shot, great. For a regular game, no. People need to start figuring out when they can be regularly available, not available this time. This kind of builds into something else that I like to see. This one's a little more general, but it happens. Is there any way I can help? Even if the answer is no, the fact that you've come in and you've offered helps, because sometimes I feel like I'm the one who has to run the whole show. And that's not really the case. Games shouldn't be about what the storyteller says is, says goes and is fiat and all that. It should be a collaborative experience. So if you come in offering to help, thank you. Hearing that schedule gives me hives. Gives me hives too. Requiem Lost saying nothing more frustrating than the player that's like, yeah, I cleared for that time, and every other time we play, they're like, sorry, I got something going on, especially when they tell us that frickin' day. If you know you can't make a session, you should be telling everybody the instant you know that you can't make it. Even if it's like, oh, I'll tell them tonight. No, just send them an email right away. Make sure that it's out there instantly. Don't forget, because I have, on more than one occasion, shown up for a LARP, which I was running to the location where it was supposed to be run, and had that person be like, oh, I'm sorry, it can't be here. And I have people en route. And somehow I had to get a hold of them. This was before like smartphones were a thing, and not everybody even had a cell phone. And all of a sudden I had to start figuring out, okay, where can we play now? And how can I make sure that everyone knows where to go? And it would have been way easier if we could have done this the day before or the week before or whatever. So yeah, as soon as you know, let people fucking know. Requiem's got one that I didn't put down, so let's have a look at it, because I think it's a great question. If I have some questions, would you mind if I contact you outside of game time? This is a great question to ask. If you're the kind of person who likes thinking about games between sessions, who maybe likes to run a side session or two, who likes to dabble in that interactive fiction, who maybe wants to start going over the mechanics of the game a whole lot, or who might just want to have a friend to talk to, yeah, ask. It's always a good question to ask. Because if my answer is, yeah, sure, contact me whenever, it's great. If I say, between games, I like to rest and relax, so understand if I'm only going to respond sporadically, then at least you'll know. If I say, no, but the best time to contact me about issues is either immediately following or immediately before the next game, you'll know. But all of these things are good, because the other thing that you're doing here is that you're saying, I'm invested enough in this game that I feel like I might be paying attention to it even between sessions. And that's just a nice thing to see. Battleoos has something to mention. Helping can be just bringing snacks to share, which falls along with something that I absolutely love to hear when somebody shows up to game is, yeah, I brought snacks. Gaming is a communal activity. It is a social activity. It can be a private social activity. It doesn't have to be wide-ranging. It can appeal to introverts as well as extroverts. And more these days, gaming is going to be something that happens in person. Saying, I went to the effort of going out and getting something that I thought everybody would enjoy is just a way to make everybody feel socially good. If you can't afford it, I understand. You don't have to stretch your finances for the game. If you feel like you want to get some snacks, but you want to make sure that everybody brings some so that we can all share 4 different things, 5 different things, fantastic. That's excellent. Little Luke. Yeah, I brought a snack. The snack is me. You're welcome. Damn right, Luke. It speaks to the togetherness of the group. It shows that you give a damn about other people than yourself. And you'd be surprised just how awesome it is for somebody who's new to a game to show up and then have somebody be like, hey, do you want some of this thing that I brought? And instantly it lowers guards. It drops expectations of difficulty. It makes things a lot easier on people if they see that, like, oh, okay, I can get along with these people. Sometimes just bringing a bag of chips is very appreciated. Yep. Now, there's a few things. If you know that there's somebody at the group who has a specific dietary restriction and you pay attention to that restriction, you get bonus points. You don't necessarily always have to pay attention to it, right? Like, it depends. Obviously, if someone's like, I'm deathly allergic to peanuts. If you open something with peanuts around me, I'll die. Don't bring peanuts. But for instance, I have an allergy to berries. If somebody brought in a strawberry shortcake, I'm not going to be insulted. I want you to be able to bring in the things that you want to eat. And I don't want to feel like, oh, we would have bought this, but John can't eat it, so we're not going to enjoy it. Don't do that. Like, it's okay. Now, I'll notice if you only ever bring snacks that I can't eat, eventually that's going to be a little frustrating, right? I'll feel a little left out. But bringing anything at all can be such a joy that it actually makes a big difference. Bringing drinks, such a joy. The nicest thing that I remember somebody doing when it came to snacks and stuff like that in distant memory, recent memory, I have only good memories, but anyway, distant memory, was somebody who brought alcohol for everybody, right? Like brought wine for the table, but knew that I didn't drink and brought me a 7-Up. And I was like, you know what? Like, that just, it was so kind, because clearly this person's like, I want wine. Everybody else wants wine. But then just went that tiny little extra distance to just make sure that there was a drink for me. And now these days it matters a lot less. We game in my home. I have drinks for me. Everybody knows, Liz, Scott, and Kate know that I can find a drink for myself. I'm not saying like it's bad if they don't bring me, a drink that I want. Absolutely not the case, right? Things change as you grow older. But that time when I was like 24 and, going out and to a game and just having somebody be like, oh yeah, I got you alongside everybody else. It just felt great, especially because I was the storyteller. Real Brick Wall says, juggling dietary restrictions when bringing group snacks can be tricky, but I always put in the effort. It's the effort that I appreciate. That's what matters. And there are times where the effort is made and it is absolutely noticeable. And there are times where even if it's just like, okay, so I brought these, which everyone can have, and I brought these, but hey, just so that you can't have these, is also fine. You don't have to somehow be like, I have to find the one magic thing that everybody can eat, because sometimes that's impossible, right? One of the things about my dietary restrictions is that it's actually sometimes, not always, but sometimes difficult for me to eat in a vegan restaurant because they often use ingredients that I can't eat. And that doesn't mean we should never go to a vegan restaurant. I just check the menu in advance and I'm like, okay, I can find this. But if I went to a thing and somebody was like, okay, so here are all these vegan treats for everybody. Oh, and for you, we couldn't buy it. That's fine. I'm also not going to make you buy something that you wouldn't eat yourself, right? Like that's not something that is correct. But it is a simple matter of somebody paying attention and being like, okay, we recognize that this works for most people, and for the people for this doesn't work, we have this other option instead. Fantastic. Totally worthwhile. The snacks that we have here, where we pay attention, we try to make sure that we keep vegan snacks available around here because we have friends who eat vegan and we do not here in this household, but we still want to accommodate, and it works out just fine. So the effort is important. So Luke says, just avoid peanuts unless you know no one has an allergy, even housemates that might not be gaming. Well, yeah. It's generally just a wise idea to be like, hey, are there any dietary restrictions I should know about? Just like that. Because in general, if somebody has a deathly allergy that can be triggered just by airborne stuff, they'll let you know. There is a certain amount of accommodation that can be made, but I'm also not going to fault anybody for saying, well, I'm going to bring this and I'm not going to immediately contact the 50 other people in my LARPing group to find out whether somebody is going to have a problem with it. The onus does sometimes have to be on the person to let people know. But yeah, it is always a wise thing to check when it comes to this sort of thing. If you're going into somebody's home, it's usually a good idea to check for yourself. Although assume that they will also let you know. Yeah, resources and needs, also needs, change as you grow older, which is absolutely the truth. Because resources does matter. As Requiem mentions here, was in a game group where it was standard to bring in $5 to pool in for lunch, and if a player could not afford it, the storyteller subtly paid for them so they didn't feel left out or feel down for not being able to play. Granted, the storyteller is very well off. Yeah, this is an important thing to bring up. For a large part of my gaming career, when I was kind of getting started in my teens and 20s, I didn't have a lot of money. And when you don't have money, it feels really shitty when somebody asks you for a small amount of money. It's not their fault, but it can be really rough if someone's like, yeah, so all you got to do is bring in $5 for game. And you're like, $5 is a stretch for me. And that can actually be more common than you think. $5 can mean the difference between bringing a snack or being able to afford a bus to get home. $5 can be either like, hey, we can all get together and eat tonight, or it can be, I needed that $5 to stretch for 2 days or a week. So I was really hoping to buy rice for it. And this can be more common among younger players, right? You just might not have the money. So you do have to be a little bit careful when you start making calls like, yeah, everybody bring in this money. Just make sure that everybody can afford it. Of course, also, if you know in advance, then you can plan for it. So that helps. It's part of the reason why here at RPG Clinic, no one is ever required to have a subscription. Nobody is ever forced to spend money on our content. The only content that's behind a paywall for us are emotes. That's it. We really appreciate the subs, and it helps us keep going, and it helps us push to do better. And I'm sure that you've seen over the years that we've been doing this, that we've increased our ability. We've increased our equipment and all of that. It's great, but we aren't going to ask you to pay. So please do not feel like it is a requirement to subscribe. Besides, if you hang out long enough, somebody might just gift you a subscription anyway, because we have some exceptionally generous individuals here who do that, and we really appreciate them, but we mostly just appreciate your presence. We want you to be around. We want you to say hi. I will take somebody who writes me a message saying, I had a lot of fun last night, over somebody who never talks to me but sends me a couple of bucks. It's knowing that you're part of the community is worth more to me than money. And I think that the other people at RPG Clinic would say the same. And Luke, when you sent snacks out and you tailored them to people, trust me, we all noticed, and it was all extremely appreciated. And that's the kind of effort that can really put things over the top for us. Like, it was a remarkable gesture, and we do thank you for that. And if you go to that amount of effort for your gaming group, then that's a group that I want to be a part of. Not because I get to benefit personally from snacks, but because it shows that people actually give a damn about each other, and that means that the game's going to go better than a group of people who don't care. So, yeah, when living to paycheck, even a couple of bucks can be a lot. It is rough. It is a thing. So just be warned, be careful. And also, if that kind of leads me to one thing about money. Storytellers often shoulder a disproportionate amount of the expense for a game, often because they're the ones who have to buy source books or miniatures for a game. It can be a huge help to defray their costs if you can afford it. If the storyteller is happy to buy all the things and has the money and doesn't ask for help, and you don't have the ability to help them, it's fine. It's totally fine. But if you're in the position to help, it can make a huge difference, especially if your storyteller is somebody who doesn't have a ton of money on their own. While I was running games, I would sometimes show up to games like hungry. Now, I've never been in a situation where I didn't have a living situation where I didn't have food. I'm not at that point. I don't want to try to claim that I was worse off than I was, but there'd be times where I'd be like, I would be at school. I'd be at CJ or university all day. And then I'd have to run out to a game. And so I wouldn't have time to go home, and I didn't have access to a fridge. So I didn't really have food, and I would be hungry, and I wouldn't have money to buy food. So what do you do at that point? So it happens. And Requiem points that out. Another great thing to say here during a session 0 is, hey, are there supplies you need that I can help with? Yep, absolutely. Does your game require miniatures? And can you secure your own miniature? Fantastic. Do you have miniatures that you can donate to the cause? Wonderful. Are there books that you can buy? Great. I owned a lot of gaming books at one point. I own fewer now. At one point I felt like that was a shame, but then I realized that a lot of those books I'd rather other people have access to. I had digital copies. I didn't need to hold on to a physical copy because I knew that I was probably not going to run those games again. And I'd rather books be read, right? I don't buy in personally to this almost fetishization of books, of like having a lot of books proves that you're a good reader, or having a lot of books is important if you work with the language, or having a lot of books shows that you're serious about what you're doing. It doesn't. I think books need to be read. If you are holding on to 100,000 books and you never read them, then that's 100,000 books that are essentially just absorbing sound as you walk through your study. But there was a time where I had a bunch of books because I would run games and people would want to have all the latest supplements, and then I'd go out and buy them. And it never occurred to me to ask people to help until one day I got one of the source books as a Christmas present. And I remember being pathetically grateful about that because I was like, I don't know how I'm going to be able to afford this book. And then they got it for me, and it was wonderful. But I also realized that it was in their best interest to get me the book because they got to benefit from it. So if you can help. It's a nice thing to do. People will appreciate it. I have 3 more prepared. I would absolutely love to hear statements that you would love to hear at a session 0, or if you have other questions or comments about role-playing in general. I mean, we'll have some time at the end of this. This wasn't going to take the full 2 hours, but we'll chat at any rate. But here's the 3 that I have left. Here's the first one. You should know this about me before we start. This kind of fits along with what a session 0 is designed to do. It's sort of like a line and veil sort of situation, but if there's something specific to your circumstance that you think that it's important for the storyteller or the whole group at the table to know, the better. Sometimes this is about something personal. You should know that I get nervous in group situations. You should know that sometimes I have difficulty speaking up. You should know that I get frightened easily. All of these things are important for me to know. Maybe it's medical. You should know that I have a deathly peanut allergy and no one should show up with peanuts to game. All of this is important. But also, sometimes it's a little more subtle. You should know that the last time that I played this game, it was a really bad experience for me, and here's why. You should know that I've played with one of the players in your game before. We don't get along that well. All of these things are hard sometimes to say because it's essentially saying, you've got a problem now. I am bringing you a problem. But I'd rather know about a problem in advance than to find out about it later on. I'd especially like to know about it if it means you're going to go into anaphylactic shock and I'm there trying to give you CPR or a tracheotomy as the ambulance takes too long to show up. And then, as your life is spilling out between my fingers, somebody else is complaining because somebody touched their dice. These are not things that I want to see. But I definitely also don't want to find out that, like, for instance, hey, so it turns out that I have a legitimate beef with somebody else at the table. Well, I want to know about this, because then maybe we can get that beef resolved, or maybe I'll know not to sort of have the two of you interact, or maybe I'll say, like, well, okay, then one of you can't play. But I'd rather know about that sooner rather than later. So if there's something that you think others should know, what for us in our group would be the equivalent of a yellow or a red card, either the pause or the stop card, you gotta bring it up if you can. It's not always easy, but it's that whole use your word hole thing that we kind of keep bandying around here on clinic hours. It's really important, because you don't want me to have to find this out on my own, because I might not find out. And then you're the one who's going to suffer for it, or everyone. I like how the music gets sad when, like, this is the topic that we bring up. You should know this about me before we start. I'm the worst. And as Requiem points out, it can be difficult to put something out there, but it is important for the storyteller and possibly the group to know. Absolutely. So, if you can, try to make sure that you've got that. If only people who were the worst would just tell us. Yeah, real brick wall. Yeah. What a sad thought, but also what a realistic thought. But yeah, people who are the worst don't necessarily say so. It's also important to know when a player knows everything about a setting. I mean, it's useful to know. Yeah, it definitely is. Another one that can be a difficult one to bring up, but is still important if you can. I don't think this is the game for me, because sometimes it ain't. And finding out about this on session 0 and bringing it up is way better than bringing it up in session 50. Saying I don't think this is the game for me doesn't necessarily mean that you're saying I quit. It means there's something about this that's troubling me, and I would like to see if we can work it out. Because maybe we can. Maybe we can work it out. Maybe we can find out what about the game is troubling you, and then we can allay your fears, or we can make some tweaks to make sure that you're okay with it. Or maybe we can find out that pretty much everybody's doesn't really want that, so maybe we'll play a different game instead. But at least we know, at least we have an idea of what we can do to try to make things better for you. And if we can't, then we found out in advance that something just ain't gonna work out. I want to be excited. I want to be like, yeah, I want that, but I can't always have it. Sometimes there are going to be things that don't quite work out the way we want. And when that happens, better to get it out of the way early, because then you are, you're in a way better position of being able to fix it. And the final one that I had prepared, although I probably could have spent a little longer on it and prepared like 50 more, but we do what we can, right? Thanks for running this. I don't see this as often as I'd like. Not with my current group. but it is a thing that I have noticed. Now, maybe it's something that's just me, but I have noticed it quite a bit, where people will come in and they will not thank you for the amount of work that you've put in already. Typically, when somebody is starting a game, when somebody is running a game, they have a front load of work to do. They do a lot of the work going in, the preparation of the setting, of figuring things out, of all of that. They've put in a ton of work already, and they're putting in that work for the good of the group. You typically, when you're creating a character, are thinking of yourself. The storyteller has to think about everybody. And thanking the storyteller is something that often doesn't happen. It's not that the storyteller doesn't get something out of it too. It's not that they don't have fun. But showing appreciation for the work that a storyteller is putting in is honestly something that should be a no-brainer, but it ends up having to be a brainer. People don't think about it. They don't realize. And when they don't realize, this ends up being a problem. Hey, Bestiary Archivist. Thanks for the follow. You do have to find in your heart, like, I thank my players because I have a lot of fun and they go to a lot of effort, and it's fantastic to have them around. I especially thank my players when they do stuff for the game. Kate sinks an inordinate amount of work into the tech behind our game. Liz and Scott both send word out through the internet. And a lot of the people who find out about us is because they've posted about us on places like Reddit or in various forums or Discords. These are things that I'm incredibly appreciative for. But my players also thank me because they know that I put a lot of work into making sure that the game can run smoothly. And even though I'm a low prep GM, there's still a lot of prep that I put into the game. Even if it isn't directly writing things down, it's thinking about things. It's worrying about the little things. It's working on my own side of tech, all of that sort of thing. So when you have the ability to run a game, you do it because you love it. But it is always nice to be thanked, even right at the start, even right at session 0. Requiem says, I remember back during a game I was running. At the end, I was not sure people had fun, and I was slightly stressed about it until one of the players said thank you, and it meant so much to me after that session. You know what? I'm going to add, in honor of this, I'm going to add another one. I'm going to add another one right here, which is real simple. Thanks, I had fun. We are often at times, depending on your personality and depending on your situation, you may be more likely to tell people when something is going wrong or more likely to tell when something is going right. You got to do both. It's really important to mention, hey, something isn't working and I kind of need the help. Absolutely. But sometimes you need the opposite. Instead of complaining or mentioning all the things that have gone wrong or all the problems that you're having, saying, I had fun is a huge thing. I very often at the end of sessions will wonder whether it was fun, whether people enjoyed themselves. Did the audience have a good time? Did my players have a good time? I don't necessarily know. As much as I'd like to think that I do, I also know that my players are exceptional performers, and so it'd be easy for them to fake having fun. I know that the audience isn't required to mention to me directly whether or not they enjoyed themselves. And then sometimes also you get that, the sneaking sort of imposter syndrome thing that slides in there where you're like, man, even though they said they had fun, like, I know that there was more that I could have done. I know that this could have been better. Maybe they're just being polite. Maybe they're just saying what they think I need to hear. Maybe they're just trying to make sure that I don't quit. What do I do? What do I do? And it builds on itself. Making sure that somebody knows, hey, I had fun. especially if you can give an example of how you had fun, it'll go a long way to making sure that there's going to be a session 1 or a session 1000. And those things are not necessarily out of reach. Real Brick Wall says, my GM prep is like 5 hours of general concern scattered over the course of 2 weeks, plus 10 minutes of actually making notes and looking up stats. Yeah, basically, right? General concern, thinking about things, wondering about permutations. Where could this go? What could happen here? How can I make the game better for my players? How can I make the game better for this specific player? All of that stuff takes time, even if it isn't writing down the history of your world. So I see myself in this comment. Battleoos mentions something I like to do is report positive feedback. Hey, storyteller, I heard Jim say to Bill they loved your last session. When feedback is said out of earshot of the storyteller, it's more powerful. Yes, this is huge because while I was running live action games, I would often hear about the complaints that people would have behind my back, but I didn't hear a whole lot of that was awesome. And I tried to convince myself, I was like, you know what? They're complaining because they really enjoy the game and they're invested. That's why they're complaining. Otherwise, they just wouldn't show up to play. So in a way, they're giving me a compliment when they're saying that of all the things that they hated. But that was me trying to justify it. It's really nice when you hear somebody be like, I had a great time. So this is important. Requiem says, actually, I had one thing I just thought of that I love to hear. What are your hopes and expectations as a storyteller? Yeah, this is a nice thing to hear. I'd also point out that you can just tell them. Having a player ask this is great. But as much as a lot of what this is about, of players coming to me volunteering what I like to hear from them, this isn't something that I necessarily expect to hear because that's sort of my job. It's my job to tell them what my hopes and expectations are. But if they ask, it means they care. And so it's definitely a nice thing to hear. It will make me feel better, even if it isn't necessary. So yeah, this actually is a good thing to hear. Completely. So I always stress about bands asking me if I enjoyed the show, since even my yes can sound very deadpan. But then on social media, I'll overcompensate by being extra enthusiastic. I don't think you necessarily need to stress, because I'd still would want to hear it however you feel you want to express it. If I hear nothing, then I can go on nothing. And even if you're like deadpan, possibly because you're meeting somebody for the first time and you're like, I can't, like, I'm starstruck, or maybe it's just because you have a deadpan nature, all that. It still feels great to hear somebody say, I had a great time. It still feels great when someone says, I loved this. If you're specific about what you liked, that is measurable. Think about this in terms of like an employee evaluation, right? Saying, John does a good job. He is a good employee. Well, okay, great. I'm glad that I heard that I'm a good employee compared to a bad employee. But it's way more useful to me and feels way better when someone says, John makes everybody feel good when he shows up to work because he is ready with a smile, always willing to help out, and knows what he's doing. Instantly, that's way better feedback. So I'm not saying that you have to necessarily start learning how to give critical feedback at the end of every session, but it feels a lot better when someone said, I loved this, as opposed to, I loved the game. If you say something about the game that you loved, it instantly feels more real. It feels like you're engaged and like you're not just passing things off. If you're talking to a band, you could say, I loved it when you performed this song. Normally, that song is one of my favorites is one way to go. Or even saying like, I never listened to that song in quite the same way, and I don't think I'll ever hear it in the same way again. Like, that's a huge thing because now you're making a specific mention of what's going on, and specific tends to show that you're engaged. It's the same thing when you're acknowledging a problem, saying that game sucked. Okay. But if you say that game sucked because I didn't get a chance to do anything. All I did was stand there and watch. Now I have a better idea of how I can improve for the next time. So that's one way of looking at it as well. Bestiary Archive says, I honestly love it when people are very direct when it comes to criticism, specifically when I DM for my kids. They sometimes give me the harshest crit, but if players do that, I know that if they did not say anything critical, then I must not have been doing so bad at this session. But that's just me. Yeah, sometimes the absence of something negative means a positive if you expect the negative. But yeah, specific criticisms, good or bad, are always going to be more impactful than general ones. I had a great time, feels lovely. I had a great time when you kissed me. Well, after a first date, which one would you rather hear? I really enjoyed the bowling alley. Well, that's good. Now I know that we can go bowling again the next time. I really enjoyed the bowling alley, not because of bowling, but because it just felt so great to talk to you. Well, now I know exactly why you wanted to spend time with me. So, it's, being specific is the thing. The answer is yes to both. Yep, absolutely. But hey, expressing enthusiasm can be difficult. One of the things that I've been trying to drill in when it comes to talking about role-playing is that as much as I say using your word hole is often your best solution, it isn't always easy. It's not always easy to talk to somebody about what you need to talk about. It's not always easy to express how you feel. It's not always easy to stand up for yourself. And that's okay. I'm telling you that it's the best solution because quite often it is. And I want people to try, but I understand if you can't. Just understand that also, if you have difficulty expressing your needs to somebody else, they may have difficulty understanding your needs. So somebody kind of has to bridge the gap. And in general, it's a lot harder to mind read than it is to speak up. So there is that to keep in mind as well. Is there anything else that you like hearing during a Zero session? Any other utterances that can come out of your players' mouths? Or hell, if you're a player, something that comes out of your storyteller's mouth, something that makes you relax, you realize that you're in a group that you think you can work with, just throw it in chat. We'll pop it up and we'll talk about it. Or if there's any other general role-playing questions that you have or comments, even if it's just something that happened in a recent game and you want to get it off your chest, we're here. We're here for the next 27 minutes. Let's fill up that time. I wish I could run as good as you do. When I hear this, because I hear it occasionally, I often tell people that running a game and playing in a game are two different things, and they actually are different skill sets. While some of them overlap, and yes, you tend to be better at one if you also study how to be the other, to a certain degree. I don't think that it is necessarily a bad thing if you say, I don't think I could run a game as well as you can. I don't think it speaks to your ability as a role player. Because sometimes it's interest, right? I don't think I could run a game as well as you can because I'm just not that into it. And then sometimes it's because it's just not something that interests you as much. I trained for years as a performer. And one of the things that one of my acting teachers told me was, you're never going to be the romantic lead, but you could be a great character actor. Well, okay. The statement aside, because I don't think that's a very useful statement to give. I think that that's kind of, I don't think that that's appropriate to say. I think that it could have been like, you might have difficulty getting cast as a romantic lead, but you're a great character actor, because it just implies that people who look like me don't deserve romance. But at any rate, there are times where it's in you to be the secondary characters. Sometimes it's harder to be the protagonist, to be the main character, and that's what PCs are. They're the main characters. And these days, I'm better at playing somebody secondary than I am playing somebody primary. So I have great respect for players. It might be something that I could get better at if I had more opportunity to, but maybe I don't want to. So a better example, played Overcooked with a friend on our game night, immediately said, I was too stressed. I did not enjoy that game. I am with you. I don't actually enjoy Overcooked. I had fun laughing while playing it with somebody, but in the end, I felt stressed because I felt that sometimes we weren't winning because I was fucking up, and sometimes we weren't winning because player 2 was fucking up. And I couldn't do much about player 2 fucking up except telling them what to do. And I don't find that kind of game that interesting. I do that for a living in a lot of ways, is working in teams and figuring out how to give and receive orders for what it's worth. And I didn't really find that was fun in a game context. I think Overcooked is a great game, but it's not a game for me. And so, afterwards I was like, I don't know if I want to play this again, because as interesting as it was, and it was interesting, and as much fun as I had, and I did have fun, I wasn't sure that I wanted to continue, because I think I would have felt like there would have been more and more stress, and that stress wasn't worth my trying to gain mastery over the game. Requiem says, I do like it when players come out of the gate with ideas of what they want to do, but that's me. Yep. I think that it's if you have an idea of a scene you want to see, of a goal you want to have, of a relationship you want to try, of even just a sentence that you'd love to shout, if you tell me what you want, I can try to make that happen. If you don't tell me what you want, I will have a lot of harder time giving you what you want, because I just won't know. I remember everything we did last session. So less of a use for session 0, but still nonetheless a great thing to be able to say. It is so demoralizing when I show up to game and somebody's like, what had happened last session? I don't remember anything. And they didn't take any notes, and they didn't bother trying to find out. They were just like, well, I don't fucking remember. Because now I'm like, okay, so last session didn't matter to you and you don't care. If you come in and you're like, oh, I have notes of what happened last session so that I can remember, fantastic. Some people have great memories and they don't need to take notes, and I won't force them to. But some people have lousy memories, and then they complain because they don't remember what happened. And I'm like, it's got to be on you to figure that out. Because if you make me remind you what happened all the time, I'm going to start feeling like you don't actually care, whether that's true or not. And I don't want to feel that way. So if you don't remember what happens in games, take notes. Record games and then listen to them if you have to or whatever, but take notes. I do like to run recaps at the beginning of sessions because I think that it is important for players to go over things, because there might be a small detail that they've forgotten that might be important. I also like hearing recaps because it shows to me what the players are focusing on. So that then if a recap, they talk for 70% of the time about the Duke and only 30% of the time about the dragon, which I thought was the main storyline, well, now I can pay attention to that and be like, they're focusing on the Duke more. Maybe I'd better pay attention. Maybe I'd better start shifting where I think the story is going, because they're clearly latching onto something else. Previously on Chicago by Night. No. Remember things. It's great. Requiem says, I remember my drama teacher would tell us all the time, sometimes a minor character can steal the show. Not sure if that is a good thing to say or bad. So it depends. Because on the one hand, saying somebody stole the show might, because some people use this term incorrectly. The correct way to say steal the show in my experience, and my experience is not definitive, but to steal the show is generally a bad thing. To steal the show means that you overtook the stage, and so people were focusing on you compared to everyone else. Now, sometimes you steal the show because you're that much better than everybody else. Okay, well, that's less of what this means. To steal the show, if you're deliberately stealing the show, that's absolutely bad, because you want the show to be a team effort. You want everybody to matter. You want to bring everyone up instead of trying to race out and have your big moment. That's stealing the show, and that's wrong. But sometimes somebody says they stole the show just because they didn't expect such an amazing performance out of somebody who wasn't supposed to be the main focus of attention. This is where things like best supporting performer comes in. And that's fine. Like, that's good. But yeah, sometimes being a minor character doesn't mean that you are not important. I mean, they've said there are no small roles, only small actors. That's also a lie. There are absolutely small roles. Don't tell me there are no small roles until you have been cast in something where you appear for 15 seconds, but you have to be there every night, and you have to show up, and you have to get into makeup, and you have to get into costume, and you walk out there, and you have 15 seconds on stage. You don't say a thing, and you walk off, and you're done. You have a small role. and you can't convince me that I'm as important as the lead. But you are important, and you do have the ability to really make an impact. Just as in role-playing, when you are... when it's not your spotlight, when it's someone else's spotlight, and you do everything you can to give that player an amazing spotlight, you are making that game worthwhile. You are playing amazing. And a good player or a good storyteller will notice. They'll notice when you are going out of your way to help someone else. So, I can annoy people with my memory, especially when I correct movie quotes. I stopped trying to correct people on movie quotes because, yeah, it's generally people don't want to be corrected. Unless, of course, they get the quote completely wrong. Then I might have to be like, are you sure it wasn't this? But if it's just words, it's you know what? Some people will care. They probably don't. And if they don't care, then the only reason why you're speaking up is to basically prove that you knew and they didn't. And I realized that that's just not an attractive quality, so I stopped doing it. But anyway, that's my situation. A lot of what happens here on Clinic Hours is my own experience, by the way. I am not a definitive experience. I am not somebody who can say, well, my way is absolutely correct. I can only speak to what my experience is and also what my preferences are. So part of the reason why I encourage people in chat to speak up is because if you disagree with me, please go ahead. Let me know. Let everyone else know, because I might be wrong. And I have been wrong. I definitely have been wrong. But I'll also point out that if I mention something, I'm not talking about you. So if I say, sometimes it's really rough when you get somebody who wants to play this kind of character, then I often find that someone's like, but I play that kind of character. I'm not a bad role player, and here's why. Or worse, they're like, but I play that character. John thinks I'm a bad role player. No, I don't. I'm telling you about specifics and examples that can either be very, very narrow or very, very broad and do not reflect the reality of everything going on. However, I will say that if I say something and it forces you to look at yourself, that says more about what you need to pay attention to. So if I say, hey, when this happens in a game, I get frustrated, and you're like, but I do this in games all the time, the reaction shouldn't necessarily be, hey, fuck you. And the reaction shouldn't necessarily be, I'm sure he's not talking about me. Really, the reaction should be, I should think about this. Not, I'm instantly wrong, but also not, I'm instantly right either. Unfortunately, that's not really how things go when it comes to like changing ourselves. You kind of have to be open to changing yourself, and that's not always a very easy thing to do. And no, I am not definitive in any way, shape, or form. Splashzone69 says, I've been running a game of Exalted 3rd Edition for a year now for a bunch of new role players, and I'm having trouble getting them to be proactive. They only seem to want to react as if it were a video game. Any help is appreciated. This is definitely a difficult situation to be in, and it's one that I can't stand when it happens to me. And it happens to the best groups. Sometimes people just don't have a thing that they want to do, and they just stand around and they're like, well, what happens next? And then they don't do anything. This most recently happened to me. When this most recently happened to me, I realized that it was because there wasn't enough set goals. It's weird to go back to motivations in the 2nd edition because I didn't like motivations, but it did have one thing going for it. Knowing what your motivation was often helped you make decisions. So one of the ways that you can help with a group of new players is not during game, because that puts pressure on them, but between games. Message them, call them up, meet for coffee, if you drink coffee, which I don't, but meet for coffee anyway. I love meeting people in coffee shops because I love the smell of coffee, even if I don't like drinking it. Anyway, and say, hey, so what's something that you want your character to accomplish? What's a goal that you'd like to see happen? Or what's a scene that you'd like to see occur? Start asking them what they would want in the future. And if you can start getting them to think about what they want in the future, then, and in a non-judgmental and in a non-time sensitive or pressured way, then it means that when there is some pressure during a session, you can remind them. If they're like, well, what do we do now? You could say, well, what is it that your character wants to do? Well, we discussed that. And I really wanted my character to try to burn Gem to the ground. Okay, so what are the steps involved in burning Gem to the ground? How do you want to go about doing that? And then what you're doing now is you're reminding them of what you've already discussed. So that pressure isn't kind of weighing down on you. And hey, thanks for the follow, Paradox Talks. It's very kind. You're giving them the opportunity then to act on something that they can kind of associate in their brain as, I wanted this. And by asking them questions, by saying, how do you want to go about doing this? You're actually training them to be active. Even though they're still being reactive because you have to ask the question, you're training them to start thinking about, how do I go about getting to the next step? How do I go about to getting to that goal? And they might realize that they can't get to that goal right away, especially if you've sort of trained them to shoot high, which in Exalted as a game, you kind of have to shoot high because that's sort of the nature of Exaltation. And then start thinking about the steps that they got to take. You putting it to them as questions instead of you telling them what to do is training them. But the training's going to take a lot. It's going to be a lot easier on them if it doesn't feel like a pressure situation. If instead it's just like, yeah, we already talked about this, but we talked about this when it didn't matter. There were no dice. There was no pressure to do it. We also did it individually, so you don't have to worry that you're wasting somebody else's time. We're just talking. We're chilling. So that's what I would do initially if I run into players like that, because even experienced players, even veteran players, sometimes forget that I need a goal. I need a goal to actually reach for, because sometimes you'll get a character who just is like, yeah, so this is what I do and I'm doing it, so I'm happy. Yeah, but you need somewhere to go. You want that arc. Magical Captain King asks about calibrations. What's a good way to tell a friend/player that they need to let others talk/play? They definitely dominate social situations by talking a lot. They're a friend, so it's difficult to bring something like that up. Well, there is the first solution, which, as I was saying earlier, is often the hardest, which is to straight up tell them. Be like, hey man, or lady, or non-binary pal, or whoever you want to be. I've noticed that instead of positioning it as, you talk too much, you dipshit, shut the fuck up, which isn't necessarily going to endear you, you can position it as an opportunity for them to do somebody else a favor. Hey, I've noticed that in a lot of social situations, this player is having some difficulty speaking up. I think they might be a bit shy. But I want to see if I can get other people involved in the social stuff. I know that your character's really good at it, and I don't want to take that away from you, but I want to give other people the chance, and I feel like they're just not speaking up as much as I would have liked. So is there any way that you can kind of help me out with this? Because I want to make sure that everybody at the table is having a good time. So instead of saying you're doing something I don't like, which is a stick, you're punishing somebody, instead you're offering them the opportunity to be a savior. You can help me help these other people have fun. And now you're shifting them into a position of like, oh, I'm a trusted insider. The storyteller is trusting me with this information of like, yeah, they are kind of quiet. Let's let them speak up a little bit. Because then you might even have a player. This happened to me actually once in a LARP situation where I was like, I encountered a player who just wouldn't shut the fuck up ever. Also, thanks for the follow, Freak Magnet. Texas Freak Magnet. I do like Texas Freak Magnet. It's some mental jujitsu. I'm shocked. Why are you shocked? Magical Captain King. But I ran into this where somebody just wouldn't shut up. And then at one point I was like, hey, so I'm noticing that like other people are kind of quiet in game. What can we do? And the guy's like, kidnap me and gag me so I can't talk, so that they have to be the ones to talk instead. And I got super excited about like making it so that he couldn't talk. And I was like, okay. And we did. And he loved it because he was like, I can't talk, because he still got to feel like he was, you know, the center of attention, even though he wasn't, because after the first 5 seconds of, oh, he can't talk, everyone just sort of ignored him. And then they started speaking up themselves and they had a lot of fun. And then at the end, he was like, I did a good thing. I feel good about helping everyone else have a better time at game. And he felt like an altruist. And what we really just needed him to do was be quiet. So you can position it that way. Because sometimes a player might not be talking because they're just a chatterbox. They might be doing that because they're feeling a silence. Silence can be uncomfortable for a lot of people. And if other people aren't talking, then you talk to fill that void. I mean, it's one of the things about this particular stream. I have to talk. I have to talk straight because I'm the only audio that's coming except for the music that's playing. So, and if I stopped talking, it might make people feel uncomfortable. If I just stopped and stared at the camera for, 45 seconds, then people might start to leave. It's actually around 7 seconds that if nothing's happening, people start thinking about abandoning. So I learned that from Pukajutsu. So the temptation might be that people are talking because other people are shy. So sometimes it isn't their fault, it's other people's fault. And then in that case, you help them. Because then it can be as simple as you saying, hey, maybe ask this other character what they think, because I think they're having some difficulty like getting into the conversation and I need your help. And they can be like, yeah, sure. Then they ask. And then this other person answers. And then it starts to change the dynamic. And then everybody feels like it's okay to talk. But there are absolutely times where these kinds of mental gymnastics that you can throw at somebody doesn't work. And when that happens, sometimes the only thing that you can do is to be like, I got to sit you down. This is going to be annoying. But I feel like you're talking over the other players and I want to know what we can do about this. Again, not you're talking over the other players and you need to stop. It's not, I am telling you what to do. It's, I've noticed this and I think we need to work on it. So what can we do? Still not going to feel great, but at least now you're opening a dialogue and you're not commanding a friend to act the way you think they should act. I will point out that there is an exception to all these rules, and that is if somebody's doing something that's making another player feel uncomfortable or unsafe. That stuff kind of has to be nipped in the bud if it's at all serious. If somebody feels uncomfortable because somebody's like, I'm role-playing a sexy god, and I'm going to hit on this other player all the time because that's my character. He's a sexy god. And then the other player is like, I really don't feel comfortable with this. I don't like being hit on in game. I especially don't like being hit on by this player. That doesn't, if you notice that there's a problem, that's not necessarily something that you kind of mental gymnastics your way out of. If somebody is feeling threatened, you kind of have to immediately be like, okay, we're going to stop the game for a little bit because we're going to learn about something called consent and about how somebody hasn't given you the consent for you to essentially I fuck them the whole game. Something like that. So what would you suggest for players that tend to be very indecisive, not necessarily passive, but just don't know what to do in certain situations? Remind them of their goals. Talk to them about their goals, remind them of their goals. And if somebody's like, I don't know what to do, tell them to go back to their goals. Go back to your character. If a game contains a system like intimacies, like Exalted, tell them to go back to their intimacies or their virtues and find inspiration there. But one thing that you can always do, always, is remind players that they cannot fuck up by acting in character. I mean, there are exceptions to that, but you don't have to necessarily go into those exceptions. The deal is, if they make a bad decision, that's part of the story. And it can be a really interesting story. It can still make for a great session, but it's more interesting that they make a bad decision than they make no decision at all, or that they spend the next 2 hours trying to think of what decision to make. Bad decisions are what make good drama. It's the conflict that makes things interesting. It's the chance that somebody is going to do something wrong that makes a story interesting and unpredictable. So aside from reminding them of their goals, reminding them of what they care about, reminding them about their intimacies or their virtues, remind them that even if they make the wrong decision, they can't make the wrong decision when it comes to the game. There are no wrong decisions in the game. There's only decisions that your character may find they'll face consequences for. That's what I would do in that particular situation. Well, it looks like we're getting close to the end of stream. I got to thank everybody for coming in and participating and asking some great questions, having some great comments, and some great sentences that we got to come in with the Zeroth impression, a title which I am still inordinately proud of, even though it is objectively bad. Tomorrow is going to be Punch Effect. That's over on twitch.tv/Elizabeth A. Neal. We got Drew Crew. We got Doomed coming up. But on Sunday, we have Exalt Twitch Academy Season 2, Episode 2. If you haven't caught any of the rest of Exalt Twitch Academy, don't worry. Now's actually the right time to hop in. If you want to find out what happened in Season 1, you can. We made a 2-minute recap video, and 2 minutes is not a lot of time. But you don't even have to watch that. You don't even have to have watched the first episode of the second season. You can just hop in and just enjoy being there with a live audience, watching and reacting to a game that I'm having a lot of fun with. And you also get to see the new Essence system for Exalted and see how it plays out. Is it going to be for your group? Maybe not. But can you see how it might work for another one? Come on down and have a look. Thanks so much for everybody who contributed. Thanks again to anybody who followed today. It's great to see you. I hope that we'll see you again. Everybody who subscribed, Kung Fu Fenris hit 1 year today, which is amazing. Thank you so much for that. And trust me, it's all going to a good place. But in the meantime, I know that it is not the easiest thing to do. But in the end, so many of your problems when it comes to role-playing, they're easily fixed. Just got to find that word hole and use it. Thanks for tuning in, folks. See you next time.